All right, last chapter has arrived. Environmental issues, and there is really very little from this chapter that is actually tested. So the things that I have made a point of mentioning in the slides here are the only things you really need to pay attention to from an environmental standpoint. The first substance, I guess the best way to put it, that will be tested is something called asbestos. Asbestos is a substance that has been very widely used in manufacturing, and just these ads are examples of some very popular products in the middle part of the last century, early to middle part of the last century, that were used that contained asbestos, and which was pretty amazing considering not only was it used in these substances, but it was advertised as a positive in these substances. Like, for example, I love this one, pure white snow. This was literally a decoration for your house at the holidays. So just throw this stuff all around your fireplace, and it's fireproof, so it won't catch on fire, and it'll look like it snowed in your living room. Meanwhile, you'll die of lung cancer several years later, and nobody told you that. But asbestos was very commonly used. It has lots of really positive properties. It's a good insulator. It's a good wear product. It doesn't wear down very easily. So there's lots of uses for it. However, it is very hazardous. Particularly, it was used a lot in construction. And this is I love this ad. Plan a Durabestos house. Literally, they advertised how many products contained asbestos in this house as a positive thing. I would hate to be selling one of these now. It would probably not go very well. I've given you an example here of one very common thing that you would see. How many of you have ever seen that floor tile? Like if you go in an older house and you go in the kitchen or bathroom and it has that sort of faux marble finished floor tile on the floor? That is 100% guaranteed to be asbestos-containing floor tile. Not only does the tile itself contain asbestos, but the glue that was used to put it down is an asbestos-based glue. And so, is that going to be a concern? Like, for example, somebody wants to renovate that kitchen. Yes, because they're going to be disturbing that asbestos, and that's when it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem when it is broken down, when it is crumbled. We call that friable. That's what the word is that refers to it when it becomes dangerous. It's called friable. Not like French friable, F-R-Y, but F-R-I-A-B-L-E. Friable just means crumbling or breaking down. When asbestos is in good shape, it is not harmful. It's only harmful when it becomes pulverized or breaks down, because what happens is the particles become airborne, people inhale them, and it eventually leads to lung cancer. That is the primary danger of asbestos, is the development of lung cancer. Now, as far as dealing with asbestos for you guys, this is going to be a residential concern. It's not that it's not in commercial properties. It is in commercial properties. However, the laws are not nearly as strict when it comes to the resale of commercial properties and understanding what the issues are and the testing in particular. What you need to know about asbestos is it's been illegal in residential properties since 1978. Okay? It cannot be used since 1978 in residential properties. If we know, or reasonably should have known, that there's asbestos in the property, it is a material fact. So like, for example, I'll go back to this picture. If we see this tile on the floor in a property, should we be disclosing that there's asbestos in the property?
Yes.
Yes, because we very reasonably know that there is asbestos. It is commonly found not only in floor tile, really old shingles generally would have asbestos in it. Some types of exterior siding would contain asbestos. Even wallpaper glues in houses built in the 40s and 50s have asbestos in it. Tile glues. Pretty much anything you disturb in a house built prior to 1978 is very likely to have at least some asbestos dust in it. Okay? And so that's a material fact if you reasonably know about it. Let me ask you this question, just like any other material fact. Do you absolutely have to disclose whether or not there's asbestos on a property? No, because you may not what? Not only you may not know or may not reasonably have known. In other words, there may not be anything that gives you a signal. If you walk in a house and a house was built in 1982, could it contain asbestos?
Yes.
Sure, but there's no way for you to reasonably believe it would because it's been illegal since when? 1978. So you'd be very unlikely to be held responsible for failing to disclose that because there's no reasonable way for you to know it. So be very careful about it. I always like this idea that you have to absolutely tell somebody. What you have to do is disclose it if you know it or should have known it. Everybody okay with that? Make sure you know the word friable. That word's going to pop up on a test probably. Friable. Also coming up on a test with regard to asbestos is how to treat it or remediate it. We treat or remediate asbestos in one of two ways. We can either remove it or encapsulate it. Either remove it from the property or encapsulate it. Encapsulation is the much more popular alternative. Encapsulation means sealing it up. Remember, it's not harmful unless it can become what? Friable and airborne. Those particles can get airborne. So if you can seal the asbestos up in a way that it never becomes airborne, then it's no longer a hazard. That's a lot cheaper than removal. Removal is ridiculously expensive when you start talking about asbestos because every time you disturb it, it becomes airborne. And so one of the ways to keep it from becoming airborne is to soak it as you remove it. Well, obviously, think about the damage you're going to do to the property if you're literally soaking it with a fire hose while you're ripping the tile out of the floor. That's probably going to create lots of other damage. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay? So it's very expensive to remove this stuff. So if you saw that tile on the kitchen floor, what's probably a better solution than ripping that tile up? Cover it up. Put the new flooring on top of the old. You know, put some kind of a backer board down, seal it up, put your new tile on top of that. Yes, there might be a little bit of a step up into the kitchen, but that's better than the $50,000 it would cost to get rid of that asbestos. That's called encapsulation. Okay? So make sure, because here's what they're going to do on a test to you. They're going to put the only acceptable method of remediating asbestos is removal. Is that a true statement or a false statement? It's false. In fact, it's not even the most common. Most common is encapsulation. All right? The next hazardous substance you need to be aware of is lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards. Again, this was something that was thought to be a miracle product. As you see from our ads here, lots of paint companies advertised exactly how much lead they had in their paint. Which is especially tragic with Dutch Boy, considering that it was a child that was their spokesperson, because the primary dangers from lead-based paint are to children. They cause severe developmental disabilities in children if they have ingested lead-based paint. People who are of my generation and older have probably heard the expression, "Did you eat paint chips as a kid?" Because notoriously, if you did eat paint chips, you would develop some type of mental development disability from it because of the lead in the paint. And here's how genius everybody was. Many of the most popular children's consumer products were painted with lead-based paint because lead-based paint was more durable. For example, cribs. What do babies do with their mouths? Chew on everything. So if the railing of a crib was painted with lead-based paint and the kids stood up and gnawed on the side of the railing, they were ingesting lead. And that causes severe developmental problems. And so this has become, a major issue. It has been illegal in residential properties, again, since 1978. Pretty much lead-based paint and asbestos have followed the same time frame. Now, here's one thing I want you to put in your notes that you might see on a test that throws people for a loop. The Lead-Based Paint Hazard Disclosure Act was not passed in 1978. It's been illegal to use lead-based paint since 1978, but the disclosure law didn't pass until the 1990s. I believe it's 1994. It doesn't matter that the law is from 1994. What year is the magic year as far as when lead-based paint had to cease to be used? 1978. Is everybody okay with that? All right. So 1978 is the magic year. Now what we say is that properties built before 1978 may have, could have, might have lead-based paint. Again, just like asbestos, we're never required to absolutely say, yes, it has lead-based paint, or no, it doesn't. Does that make sense for everybody? What we're required to do is disclose either what we know or what we should have known. Realistically, the only way you can know if there's lead-based paint is if it's been tested, if a test has been performed. And the ways you remove lead-based paint, the same ways you remove or deal with asbestos. Yes, you can remove it, but you can also what? Encapsulate it. What would encapsulating it be? Paint over it. You can simply paint over it. As long as it's in good shape, it's not peeling, cracked, that sort of thing, then you can simply paint over it, and that is an acceptable treatment for lead-based paint. This has led to a lot of additional costs as far as renovations go, because if you start tearing out walls in a house built before 1978, that dust cloud could not only contain asbestos, but it could also contain what? Lead. If you are having windows replaced on an older home, for example, one of the things you'll see now, or you should see now, is you should see plastic on the ground around the foundation wall, because if they're taking those old windows out, those windows are likely painted with what? Lead-based paint, and so those paint chips that could fall on the ground, well, that lead will very readily absorb into the ground and then into the groundwater, and if there's a well nearby, that can go into the well water and contaminate somebody's drinking water. So there's lots of regulations that go along with this. For your purposes on the test, you need to know about the lead-based paint hazard addendum. What is an addendum? What does it do to a contract? It adds to it. And here's what it adds to the contract. It says, and it's like a warning to a buyer or to a tenant, you have to give it to either one, whether they're buying the property or whether they're leasing the property, they have to be given this form if the property was built before what year? 1978. And here's what the form says. This property was built before 1978. Therefore, it what? It might have lead-based paint. And then it'll ask a simple question. Does the seller have any knowledge of lead-based paint? And the seller can say yes, the seller can say no, or the seller can say, I don't know. Does that make sense? And no representation, essentially. The other big thing about the form is it gives the buyer or tenant, whichever one we're talking about here, 10 days to evaluate the property for lead-based paint. In other words, they have 10 days to do what if they want to pay for it themselves? What does evaluate the property mean? Check to see if it has what? Lead-based paint. So basically, if this addendum is used correctly, then essentially what you're doing is giving the buyer or the tenant 10 days to check themselves to see if the property has lead-based paint, and if it does, then you have to release them from the contract. Now, I will tell you, in my experience, very few people actually exercise this right to have the property checked. And here's the reason why. It is very unlikely at this point in time to find lead-based paint that has not been covered over several times. I mean, if you think about it, you would be talking about a property that had not been painted since the 70s. That's a long time. And the truth is, even if it was painted in the 70s, there's a pretty high likelihood it doesn't have lead-based paint anyway. By 1975, lead was only found in about 25% of paint. So even if the house was built, 1975, there's a 75% chance it never had lead-based paint anyway. My parents had their house tested. The house I grew up in was built in 1972 and it had no lead-based paint. So I mean, just to, as a reference point there.
Cheap builder.
Cheap, exactly. They were cheap. They were cheap. Exactly right. My granddad still kept, until the day he died, he still kept lead-based paint around the farm because he said it lasted so much longer. I asked him one day, I said, you know that stuff's dangerous? He said, shit, you ain't supposed to eat it. So there you go. The wisdom of granddad, right? He used it on farm machinery. So If you wanted to go out there and lick the tractor, you probably got some lead. But if you were licking the tractor, you probably already had some mental issues going on. So it didn't really matter. All right, are we good on this? The 10-day period and having to give the form if the property is built before 1978. Remember, the seller's under no obligation to absolutely find out if there's lead-based paint. They're just saying it could be, and if you want to know, you can look for yourself. Radon. Radon is the third hazardous substance that you might see on a test. It is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. It has no smell, it has no color, there's no taste associated with it. It is in this room as we speak right now. I hate to tell you. It does cause lung cancer. I'm sorry about that too. But only in high enough concentrations. It's only been shown to be harmful in high concentrations. It's a naturally occurring gas. It's around us all the time. The problem with it is it becomes concentrated sometimes in some structures. And we don't know 100% what the reasons are why it affects some structures differently than it does others. I mean, you literally can have next door houses and one has a really high radon level and the one next door does not. There's really not much rhyme or reason to the way this works because it comes up from the ground. There are natural sort of veins underneath the ground that this radon gas flows in. It comes from the breakdown of uranium. You don't need to know that from the test. But as uranium breaks down, it's radioactive. The gas comes up. The gas itself is also radioactive. Outside, it doesn't matter because it dissipates very quickly. Inside, it can become concentrated. You need to know the level at which the EPA says it's dangerous. 4 picocuries per liter of air is the level at which the EPA says you should do something about it. Just to give you some point of reference, 4 picocuries is the equivalent lung cancer risk of somebody who smokes about 8 cigarettes a day. So, you know, that's a pretty decent level of lung cancer risk. So I would maybe suggest that maybe you might want to look at doing something even before it gets to 4 picocuries. Does that make sense to everybody? The EPA doesn't say 4 picocuries is safe. They say that if it's above 4 picocuries, you should do something about it. It is a material fact in North Carolina if it's above 4 picocuries, and the only way you know what it is if it's been tested and you've got a test result above that level. But it comes up from the ground, and so it's going to be there. You need to have the house tested, or you won't know if it's there. As far as treatment, a fan. Generally speaking, a fan installed in the crawl space, if it's a crawl space home, a fan installed underneath the slab, if it's a slab home, would remove any radon before it has a chance to enter the home and vent it above the roof. That's the treatment. They come back, it costs about $1,500 to have a radon treatment system installed in a home. Like your normal crawl space home, what they would do is they would go under the house, and everybody know what the vapor barrier is. You know what I'm talking about when I say the vapor barrier? That's the plastic that lays on the ground underneath the house. They would go underneath the vapor barrier and they would lay down a piece of pipe with holes drilled in it and gravel in it, and they put a fan on the end of the pipe that's sucking air. So basically the air is being sucked from under the vapor barrier, and then it goes out, and it goes out and blows it out above the roof line. So in other words, as the radon comes up from the ground, rather than it continuing to go into the house, it just gets sucked out and evacuated out above the roof line. That's the treatment for radon. It's not a very complex system at all. So you should not be afraid of a higher radon reading as long as you get it treated. That's going to be the deal there. Everybody okay? Mold. That's a lovely picture. It's one I took myself, actually, in a house that I was looking at one time for somebody. Mold is found in almost every home in North Carolina to some level. So on a test, you need to be very careful of any kind of a statement about mold always being a material fact. It's not. Only mold that is either in abundance or of a particularly harmful type is considered material fact in North Carolina. So realistically, You can't know if it's a material fact unless you've had it tested and the testing company has said that this level of mold or this type of mold is a health hazard. Everybody okay on that? So mold is not automatically a material fact, because the truth is there's mold in every property. This is not a natural level of mold, by the way. If you can tell, that's a ceiling. There's the recessed canister light right there. That's an ugly thing. And when it looks like this on this side of the sheetrock, you don't want to see what it looks like behind the sheetrock. Because generally speaking, that mold does not go from the front back, it comes from the inside out. And once it starts to show on the front, the back looks real, real ugly. This was a house that was about to implode. And it did. It had to be torn down. The mold had reached such a critical stage that this was in the basement. And it would have required complete removal of all of the, not only the finished basement, but all of the floor joists above it for the main floor. All of the HVAC systems and ductwork, because the HVAC systems were both located in the basement, the air handlers. So it was they were looking at mold remediation costs of over $200,000 in this house. Yeah, that's what they did. They tore it down. Complete loss. So it can be very harmful, obviously. Carbon monoxide, another very harmful substance. Carbon monoxide can cause death nearly instantly. It is also colorless, odorless, and tasteless. Much more deadly than radon, though. Radon might give you lung cancer over the course of 20 years. Carbon monoxide might kill you in 20 minutes. So, in North Carolina, it is required that if the property has either an attached garage or any open flame, that it have a carbon monoxide detector. So that's pretty much any residential property, right? Open flame would be a furnace, would be a fireplace, would be a gas stove, or an attached garage. Because one of the biggest sources of carbon monoxide poisoning is actually cars, and this is becoming increasingly common with remote start. People get up in the morning, it's cold, they go downstairs, they make their coffee, they open the garage door, they hit the button on their remote to start their car up so it's nice and toasty warm, they leave the garage door closed, and they never make it out of the shower because they die of carbon monoxide poisoning. Because that carbon monoxide gets trapped in the house, gets sucked up into the ventilation system, and it is very deadly. So make sure you have carbon monoxide detector in your house if you don't already. Notice it says landlords responsible for placing smoke and carbon monoxide detectors at the beginning of the lease. Not the beginning of the lease, it has an E on the end of it, lease. So at the beginning of any lease, the landlord is responsible for placing the detectors. They are not responsible for keeping batteries in them. That would be the tenant's responsibility. But making sure they're there is the landlord's responsibility. Underground storage tanks. These are fun. Big deal here. Real big deal. You want to get sued as a real estate broker? Don't recommend that your client, forget to recommend to your client that they look for underground storage tanks. If the property has an underground storage tank on it, and if that tank leaks, the owner of the property is legally and financially responsible for the entire cost of that cleanup. If that extends to other properties, you're responsible for the cost of cleanup on their property as well. So say, for example, your tank leaks and contaminates your next door neighbor's well. You going to have to dig them a new well? Yeah. Absolutely. What if there's no location on their property that can accommodate a new well? You just bought a house. So this is a big deal as a real estate broker to recommend to your clients that they check for these underground storage tanks. There are companies that will come out for $100 and they just walk around with a metal detector, essentially is what they do, and look for them. So I would highly recommend you have this check done. If they find an underground storage tank, what should you make sure has happened with it? That it's been emptied, it's been properly closed off, and that it's not leaking, doesn't have any contents in it, and that it's not leaking. And do that before they buy the property. So it's a major check you want to have done. And they are a material fact. It can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to clean this mess up. Most commonly, they were used for fuel oil for furnaces. Number 2, fuel oil. You had oil burning furnaces in the property. All right, septic tanks, everybody's favorite topic. So a septic tank is the most common type of waste disposal system in North Carolina. It's an underground tank. Yes, it's where all the yuck goes. Sorry, it has to go somewhere, right? And that's where it goes into the septic tank. And then the water filters out of the tank and into leach fields in the yard. Now here's what you need to know about septic tanks from a test taking perspective and from a disclosure perspective. I don't care how many rooms that house has that look like bedrooms. You market the house as the number of bedrooms on the septic permit. If the septic permit says it's a 3-bedroom house, then it is what? Then it's a 3-bedroom house. I don't care if there's 12 rooms that have beds in them and closets. It's a 3-bedroom house. You are required as a listing broker to pull the septic permit before you list the property. You have to go to the county and pull that permit. It is a material fact. It's required to be disclosed if the property is on a septic system. That's a big one for testing and for real world. Brokers do get sued over this. You know, they sell something and say it's 4 bedrooms, and then the person buys a house, and 5 years later they want to resell the house, and they hire another real estate broker, and the next real estate broker actually does their job and pulls the septic permit, and the septic permit says 3, and so now they have to market it as 3. Is the house going to sell for less money as a 3-bedroom house than as a 4-bedroom house? Absolutely. Is that seller going to be awfully mad that they just lost money because they thought they had a 4-bedroom house and they only have a 3-bedroom house? And then they're coming back and suing that listing broker. That does happen, so make sure you pull those permits. And that's it for environmental. Voila, all done. With 3 minutes to spare. So we will hit the last few slides in the Appendix A, the license law and rules, on Monday when we kind of go through the review, because I generally speak and review all